For today's activity, we're going to be investigating watersheds. This is a really simple thing that you can do at home with a few simple materials. Before we get to that, however, think about these questions. Have you ever wondered why there are streams in certain areas and lakes in other areas? How could you tell which direction a stream of rainwater would flow when it hits the earth? Before we move on, think about the shape of the land. Think about the shape of the surface of the earth. Is it always flat? Does it have hills? What does it look like? As you think about that, come up with a hypothesis to fit this sentence. If the shape of the land is blank, then the water will blank because blank. Once you've hypothesized, now we're going to look at our materials. To do this lab, all you need is a spray bottle of water, something to catch that water in, and then some paper. You also need something to mark with the paper with. I'm going to use food coloring, but you can also use a black water-based marker, and it just works just as well. Alright, so let's go into our procedure. The first thing we need to do is take our white piece of paper and crumple it up. As you uncrumple it, you want to keep all of those nice lines and ridges that have formed in that paper. And then set that in your pan. Now I'm going to mark the piece of paper with my food coloring, but again, you could mark the ridges with a water-based black marker as well. It's important here to realize that you're just marking the ridges. This is going to help us see what would happen when water hits the surface of the earth. So now I have the major ridges of my landform marked, and now I'm going to bring in the precipitation. Watch what happens when precipitation falls on this landform. Pay close attention to where the water goes. Okay. In your assignment, one of your questions asks you to describe what happened. Another question, what do you suppose the paper that we have here represents? Think about things in terms of the real world. What does the mist or the spray in the spray bottle represent? Why does water flow down into the creases? As you can see here, the water's flowing down into the creases and it's following a specific path. If you were looking at a real landform, what would you call that water that went down in the creases? If you were looking at a real landform, what would you call the water that collects in one area? What happened to the food coloring as the water flowed? As it rained, what happened to the food coloring? Where will the ink or the food coloring eventually end up? Will it end up in the highest place in the watershed or the lowest place? And if that ink represents pollution, what problems would that cause? And then your final question, tell me how this activity relates to the water cycle. See if you can think of where evaporation would be, where precipitation would be, and where would condensation be. Happy investigating!